2025 is here, and the pace of change has never been faster. Are you ready to thrive in a world where AI accelerates everything, but can't replace the most essential human skills? That's why we've created a special 11-part series on the Learn It All podcast to help you master the skills needed to future-proof yourself and your career. From self-awareness to listening and developing trust, these are the traits that will make you irreplaceable in an ever-evolving workforce. I'm Damon Lembi, CEO of LearnIt and two-time best-selling author, and I'll be your guide throughout the series. Joining me is Dr. Fitch-Collins, LearnIt's top-ranked facilitator and a leadership expert dedicated to helping you grow. This series is brought to you in partnership with our good friends at MuchSkills, a platform that helps organizations map and understand their workforce capabilities. Drawing from insight from their survey of over 28,000 professionals, we'll unpack 11 skills in this weekly series that will prepare you to thrive in an ever-evolving world. If you enjoy this episode, please take a moment to rate and review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us share this message far and wide. Let's dive into today's top skill. 93% of employers say critical thinking is more important than a candidate's undergraduate degree. That was an AACU report. And also, the average person makes 35,000 decisions a day, and critical thinking helps them ensure they're good ones. That's a Cornell University study. So, Mickey, welcome to this episode. How are you?
I'm doing great, Damon. Thank you. I love those quotes so far.
Yeah, thanks. So let's just kick it off with, we're talking about critical thinking today. Can you give us a brief overview or definition of what critical thinking is?
Yeah. I mean, in layman's terms, what we're talking about is how do you objectively analyze information that's coming at you? How do you look at claims that other people are saying, information, the stuff that we read online, the stuff that's on social media? How do we actually evaluate that stuff? Figure out what is empirically true, what is right, what judgments can I make, how can I solve problems from it, how can I make decisions from it? And I love what you said before. I think it was the number 35,000 decisions that we make every single day.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it is crazy. I mean, I was thinking like a few hundred, but 35,000. I mean, I guess from snooze button to laying your head down on the pillow at night, it's a lot of decision making. But we have to infuse critical thinking into everything we do. Otherwise, we're just kind of ambling around doing a lot of biased decision-making all the time.
And so what happens if you're not using critical thinking?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the biggest problems is that as human beings, we have a lot of built-in cognitive biases. There was something I was reading an article recently. It's something like 275 known cognitive biases and like fallacies of thought, right? And some of these, and we talk about the slippery slope phenomenon, right? Where you go from A to Z really quickly, or confirmation bias, where we're just trying to find other people that think the same way we do, or information that kind of resonates with what we're trying to see, or even when you're shopping for a new car, all of a sudden the car that you've zoned in on, everybody around you seems to drive it, right? These sort of things. If we don't employ some level of critical thinking in all of that, our world goes from being the broad scope world that it is to this very biased, very limited way of looking at things. And we start either believing our own hype and kind of believing our own narrative all the time, or we run the risk of making decisions that only kind of satisfy certain agendas that we have and not really looking at the full picture. And this is super important, especially in our work worlds, because we have opposing information and opposing ideas and different concepts coming at us all the time. And so we really need to, critical thinking to me is absolutely one of those skills that needs to be way up at the top of skills we're continuously building.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's incredibly valuable, especially with what we're at with in the AI taking over a lot of the automated tasks, being able to think critically, leverage AI, ask better questions, look at things differently. So today, can you share with us, I want you to get into a story, but before, can you just mention the framework that we're going to be going through?
Yeah. This one, I mean, Damon, and our listeners know from listening to our podcast so far, we love our acronyms. And the one that I'm going to focus in on is the acronym CARE. That's the framework that I want everybody to walk away with, is how do we kind of objectively look at pieces of information in a way that CARE stands for, I mean, I can get into the details of it in a moment here, but correlation does not equal causation. Alternative explanations, reliable sources, and evidence. And so that's kind of the framework or the filter through which we're going to look at critical thinking today. And we talk about this, by the way, Damon, we spent a lot of time in our Think Critically workshop going through this as one of the many frameworks that we explore in that workshop.
Awesome. Well, let's dive into a critical thinking story.
Yeah. So this actually, and many people know, my first career in life was in higher education administration. And a few years ago, I was working at a university and I was overseeing kind of a cross departmental committee that, like a lot of universities, was charged with improving student retention rates, right? Like this is the name of the game in university life. And it was a really high stakes project because enrollment numbers had been steadily declining, as is happening in a lot of universities. And my administration colleagues were really pressuring our group for some quick solutions. And everybody was kind of coming at us with the same sort of things like, oh, if we just extend the library hours, we just need more academic advisors, we just need to be marketing more, whatever it is. And people were just willing to accept that and like, okay, let's move on. But to me, it just didn't sit right. There was this big disconnect of like, this is the same old sort of thing. And I encouraged our team to pause and kind of dive deeper into, well, we're talking about here is applying solutions. We're not really talking about how we're evaluating the information and the underlying trends. And so how do we actually better understand the root causes of student attrition, right? Like that's what we're really trying to fix here. So we need to think more critically about that. And I had gone to a critical thinking workshop. And so I ran that team through an exercise. And what we did through all of that was kind of peel back the layers of the onion. And to better understand student retention, you need to better understand student attrition. And what we realized, the pattern, was that the majority of students that were leaving the university weren't leaving because of academic issues. They weren't leaving because of social issues, anything like that. They were leaving because of two reasons: mental health and financial insecurity. Now, had we not gone through that critical thinking exercise, we would have just applied the same old sort of solutions. Extend those library hours, get more academic advisors, all of this sort of stuff. But in light of that, it shifted our focus entirely. And it's that type of an experience, right? We were able to apply these completely different sort of solutions that worked really well. In fact, that university has its highest enrollment numbers now than it's had in, I think, 20 years. But had we not gone through that critical thinking process and kind of pressed the brakes a little bit and said, I don't know that this is right, we would have just applied that same old solution. And that's the importance of critical thinking. I'm wondering, Damon, could you share a story of recently, like when you have applied some critical thinking to your work?
Well, this isn't
Putting you on the spot here.
oh, no, good. Thank you. This isn't a recent story, but probably 20 years ago, this is one of my favorite stories. I got a call at 7:30 in the morning. And learnIt was in the basement of our old location. That was my father's building, and he put us in the basement of all things. And a pipe broke. And there was the water was starting to fill up. And we needed to figure out the classes were starting at 9 a.m. And we were able to get the water to stop, but obviously everything was destroyed in there. And so we had to think about, what do we do with the 100 students who are coming in to take classes? And I think that was a great example of critical thinking, where I didn't just completely freak out. I kind of just took a step back and said, let's think about what are our potential ways that we can work through this. And I asked people to throw out some examples, and we ended up contacting one of our competitors who happened to be right upstairs, a company called Quick Start, and said, hey, can we rent space for you for the week or month until this gets taken care of? And so I think that was a good example right there of critical thinking and problem solving. We kind of went through pretty quickly. One easy thing to do would have just been to cancel everything, but that, you could always just revert to that. But instead, I just kind of thought critically, like, what is the worst case scenario here? What are some other options, and how do we think out of the box? And I just try to really take a step back, like you said, Mickey, and really evaluate and think through what we could potentially use as options.
Well, and two things, Damon, from that I think are super important to recognize, which is that, critical thinking is really a part and parcel to decision-making and problem solving. These three things, I mean, they kind of form a bit of a triad, right? Of that to become a better problem solver, you have to think more critically. To make better decisions requires us to be critical thinkers, and each one of these things kind of scratches the back of the other one. And the more that we build our skills up in all three of these areas, right, the better that we're going to be. The other thing I was thinking too, I see you have those learnIt hats and mugs and stuff behind you. I was hoping you were going to tell a story that all of a sudden you decided to get like learnIt branded rain boots or something for everybody. For in the future, in the basement, you never know when you might need it.
Well,
That's
the
a
funny
great
thing
story.
is, thank you. The funny thing is, we actually had 3 minor floods in there, and I think the insurance company might have put me in jail if we had another one because of insurance costs. But no, it was just one of those situations where you got to kind of think it through. Mickey, what are some common challenges or mistakes people make when it comes to critical thinking?
Yeah, yeah. I think the most common one, I mentioned some of those cognitive biases or those fallacy kind of thought patterns. Those sort of things. Daniel Kahneman, I don't know if you've read the book Thinking Fast and Slow. He passed away last year, but that book is just fantastic. I feel like it was
Fabulous
just
book.
yeah, I feel in my head, I always think like it was just published recently, but I think it was like 2011 or something. So it's been a few years. But he talks about this system one thinking and system two thinking. And system one thinking is like that super fast, automatic, like hand on a hot stove sort of stuff. The system two stuff is the stuff that requires us to be a little bit more like deliberative and a little bit more intentional. And the cognitive biases stuff, that's the biggest challenge I think folks have is that if we're not aware, right? Like if we don't take time to really stop, again, using that same phrase we've both used already, step back a little bit. The analogy I always think about like tapping the brakes on your car a little bit or like a yield sign. Am I actually thinking about this correctly? Am I just pursuing this line of thought because it feels reinforcing to the other ways that I like to think about things? Am I wrongfully listening to one voice or another, right? I mean, there's all of these different things. And biases, I mean, that word bias, I think, kind of is a little alarming to some people, but really it's shortcuts, right? Like these mental shortcuts that we take. So I think, the failure, the failure for us to pause and reflect to see if we're engaging in cognitive biases is probably one of the big ones. I think one of the other things too, honestly, is I think, and I talk about this in a number of our workshops, is I think many of our organizations are so, you know, think of your every single day. I'm sure your day has been similar to mine, right? Problem solution, decisions that need to be made, boom, 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 right? The speed with which we do our jobs, the cultures, and it doesn't matter, we're talking learnIt, we're talking other organizations. Every organization or most every organization is operating at this lightning speed. And that can be a direct challenge to critical thinking because critical thinking requires us to slow down. It requires us to pause, requires us to be more deliberate. But when we're under pressure to move faster than we're already going, people can engage in some of these shortcuts. So I think that's kind of a couple of the challenges that we might experience. I don't what else do you think are kind of some of the challenges for us to engage in critical thinking?
Well, I just want to double down on what you brought up about confirmation bias because that's something that I've struggled with quite a bit, but I feel like I've gotten better at it. Is, instead of if there's decisions out there or situations are coming up or problems, instead of looking to people who I think would agree with me, instead, if you surround yourself or you could tap into others who have different ways of looking at things or diverse views, and you can listen to what they actually say, right? And not automatically say, no, no, this is wrong. It really helps you think more critically on how to go about making a decision or solving a problem. And I think it makes a world of difference. And I think when you tap into others, instead of those who just think the same way you do, I think you're going to be much better off. But let's go into, Mickey, the care model.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so this care model, CARE, again, kind of thinking about caring, is really for us to use to evaluate claims or evaluate information, which is totally related to what you were just talking about. I was thinking about the value of talking with other people that have opposing views or different views. I was also thinking about how we consume news, right? Of consuming the same news story from 2 or 3 different vantage points, different news outlets to kind of hear how people tell that story a little bit differently or kind of share that information a little bit differently. And so this care model The first piece is correlation does not equal causation. And this is a super common, again, this is one of those biases sort of things that we need to be very aware of is that oftentimes what we see is, well, here's these two things that are happening at the same time that are on a similar or same trajectory to one another. And therefore we start looking at them and saying, oh, well, this one is causing the other one. The example I always like to bring up in our Think Critically workshop that we have is that ice cream sales and murder rates are highly correlated, right? Highly correlated. Now, people could look at it and be like, well, wait a second here, Mickey. Like, selling ice cream or consuming ice cream doesn't make people get murdered. No, but there's that lurking variable, summer weather, right? I mean, I live in northern Wisconsin and it is cold right now. I'm not eating a lot of ice cream. I love ice cream, but I'm not eating a lot of ice cream right now. We eat ice cream when it's hot outside, right? And when do people tend to be outside, getting into arguments? People are uncomfortable, right? Summer months, right? And so it's this idea that we might look at something and say, oh, this is on a parallel trajectory. There must be a relationship here. And that's not really accurate, right? So that's the first idea is correlation does not equal causation, okay? The second part of things, A, is for alternative explanations. This is kind of exactly what you were talking about before about seeking out other people that have different ideas or opposing viewpoints. Actually, a great usage for a lot of our generative AI tools these days is to go in there, and I've done this a number of times. This is the decision I'm thinking of making. Here's the factors I've considered. Tell me why I'm wrong, right? It's a pre-mortem, essentially what we're doing, a retrograde analysis. Seeking out alternative explanations. Why might this be happening? Okay, so sales are up this month, but we didn't do anything different. Why might that be happening? This other factor is happening. What are the different things that are going on into that, other than looking at the obvious sort of piece? The R stands for reliable sources. This is a huge one, right? Thinking about 2025, right? Here we are, lots of different news sources. Everybody is an expert. Everybody is an influencer, right? How do we actually know the reliability of the people who are sharing information with us? Who was the intended audience? When was this information shared? How was the study done? Which gets into the E for evidence. I think about all the time. I see things, and you do as well, right, on LinkedIn and other news sources. People cite something. I always, and this comes from my academic background, but I always dig into the citation. I'm like, okay, what was that study? Anytime I see a study that has a big number in it, right? 98% of respondents, whatever it is, I go and look at it. Now, if we're talking about an N of 10 people, I'm not going to give that study a ton of credibility, right? Because 98% of 10 people, that's not a whole lot of people, right? Like that's not super, that's not a really big deal. Similarly, when organizations put out white papers saying like, oh, here's this solution to this problem, and then here we go promoting our product, right? Of course you're going to promote your product, right? That's not the most reliable piece. It's not the best piece of evidence, right? So I think that care, if we keep that in mind, and I think if we care about our critical thinking, right, that's a great way to remember that. It's essentially, the analogy of the car. We want to be able to have the brakes so that we can slow down a little bit, to be more deliberative so that we can go fast later.
So, Mickey, critical thinking is a tough skill to learn. So, how can an organization foster critical thinking or help people, understand that it's important and how to get better at it?
Yeah. I think a lot of it is, I'm number one, speed and rate of response, right? Encouraging people to slow down. I was just facilitating our Think Critically workshop the other day, and one of the learners in the class said, one of the best things that I have done over the last 6 months is wait to respond to emails until the next day, right? The ones that give you those kind of emotion tingles, positive or negative, big decisions, stuff like that. It's kind of the same way, like, we put an item in our Amazon cart and maybe we let it sit there for a few days to be like, do I really want this? Do I really need it? Right? The whole idea here is to encourage people to slow down. So I think part of that, it's Cal Newport, right? Slow productivity, right? Slowing down a little bit. I think one of the other things too is top-down leadership. You talk about this all the time, right? Is top-down leadership and modeling. When we can have, executive level leadership, senior level leadership saying, okay, what are the other possible ways that we could look at this, folks? Here is what we believe to be true, but what else could be going on here? What are the other lurking factors maybe we're not aware of? And making space for people to poke holes in different arguments, right? And not taking offense to, well, I thought my argument was the right argument. Why is everybody poking holes in it? No, let's just make sure that we're having a discussion so that we're really seeing things from different angles. I think those are two things that I think of. But I mean, from your perspective, Damon, for your role as a leader in our organization, I mean, what are some of those things that either on a one-on-one scale or on a full team scale, what are those things that you do to try to, infuse critical thinking into the team?
You just stole the words right from my mouth. On the last one, it's asking open-ended questions and really not allowing. I just do this with my daughter Lucy at home and doing her homework. She might get frustrated and want me to give the answer, and I want to give the answer. And the same thing happens at the office. You don't. You ask open-ended questions and you keep probing and you help others think of different solutions and maybe ask them, say, okay, well, what's another alternative? Think a little bit about what else could we try? I think it's just getting in the habit, building that muscle of helping others learn to get curious. And a lot of it, and again, you have to model the behavior, where hopefully a leader, they see you in a conversation where you're not just jumping a reaction and just jumping in and deciding. You're actually thinking things through, taking a step back, maybe like you said. But also, I think it's really important that it comes down to creating a psychologically safe space too, where you can make a mistake, right? So maybe you allow somebody to make a choice and an alternative solution. It doesn't go exactly the way you want it. As a leader, you still need to be able to jump in and say, "Hi, I have your back. I appreciate you trying that." Because if you don't, then Mickey, people are always going to just take the safest route. And it may not be the best route. It might just be the easiest or the safest and get you mediocre results. Where if you want to get phenomenal results, you need to think critically, you need to think differently, and you want to create that type of environment that inspires people to take risks, take
Yeah.
chances, think about things, say things that may sound stupid, but they're really not.
Yeah.
Get people out there and to share their ideas.
When you were describing that, it made me think of another one of those really common cognitive biases, which is the bandwagon effect, right? And the bandwagon effect, right, is when everybody jumps on the bandwagon, right? And we just keep rolling down the hill together rather than saying, well, hang on a second here. Let's wait, let's think about this, whatever that might be. And I think you're absolutely right in the direct connection between that and psychological safety because, the organizations that have folks that can say, well, hang on a second here, I have a differing perspective and people are going to listen to that voice rather than just say, no, 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 no. Like you just need to get on board with this. I think that that's really important, right? Because again, we can fall victim to our own shortcuts and cognitive biases on a regular basis for sure.
Another one that I really like that you were mentioning a little bit earlier is resulting, right? Resulting is just because you have great results doesn't mean you took the right process to get there. For example, I heard Annie Duke talk about this in one of her great books, is like driving drunk. I mean, you might get home safe, but that's not the right decision to make, right? So sometimes just getting the right results is just there's different ways you can go about it and think critically, whether in this case it's using Uber or calling a friend. Same thing when it comes to sales, right? Maybe you got the deal this time, but that might not work every single time. So you want to look at your alternative solutions. This has been a great conversation. One more question I have for you. In our thinking critically class, when somebody leaves that class, what is one or two things that they tend to come back to you, Mickey, and say, wow, that was great. I really learned how to do this.
That is such a perfect question because literally about an hour ago, I looked at my LinkedIn. I get messages all the time from folks that have taken workshops. One of the things I recommend in that workshop is the use of the 5 whys concept, the Toyota 5 whys, where you ask why and then why and then why and why. I got a message from somebody I taught that workshop yesterday morning, and he said, I already used this 3 times in between yesterday and today. I mean, it's been like 36 hours, maybe not even. And that 5 whys process, he said that's such an easy way to really get at either the root cause of something or really truly understanding what's the explanation for this type of phenomenon or whatever that might be. And I think that is such a good go-to tool for us all to have. So, I mean, that's one of the biggest things that people walk away with. I think also the self-awareness, the ability for all of us to kind of be that much more willing to put the mirror up in front of ourselves and say, am I actually truly thinking this through as objectively as I can? Like, we can't be 100% objective. Like, that's just not attainable as humans. But I can be more objective tomorrow than I probably am today. And that's kind of one of those things that I tend to hear from that workshop. We go through all sorts of different exercises, different cognitive biases. It's a great workshop. It's very interesting. Lots of interesting stories and stuff. And so I'd love, Damon, if there's folks out there that want to check that workshop out, I'd love to get them connected so that they can hang out with us for that Think Critically workshop for sure.
Well, I want to put you on the spot. Thank you for saying that. Is there any other resources? I know you already mentioned Think Fast and Think Slow, but any other great books out there or documentaries or anything that can help you get better at critical thinking?
Yeah, actually, I mean, the one that is big and top of mind right now, I talk about using AI for critical thinking, and that comes from our friend of learnIt, Jeff Woods, the AI-driven leader. A lot of what he talks about in that book, this is really about using AI as someone in a leadership position. But a lot of what he frames in that particular book is, how can I use AI as a thought partner? And I think of thought partner, you extend it one step further. I mentioned that exercise before that I've been doing, which is like, here's what I'm thinking about doing. Tell me why I'm wrong, or tell me the reasons why this might fail, essentially doing a premortem. The ways in which we can prompt, and I have to give so much credit to Jeff for this line. He says, interview me one question at a time. And it's so great because you end up being in this conversation with ChatGPT or whichever tool that you're using. And it allows you, by the nature of that conversation, you're now engaged in a critical thought process, of evaluating exactly what you're doing. So I would recommend his book for a lot of different reasons, but in particular, that prompt to use that as a critical thinking exercise for yourself.
Yeah, it's a great book. And also, I highly recommend, we'll put this in show notes, check out my interview with Jeff. I think it's a masterclass on AI.
Absolutely.
I use it all the time to challenge my assumptions by interviewing me one question at a time. So to kind of recap what we did today, we talked about the CARE model. We talked about why critical thinking is so important, how to slow down, look at things differently, be careful with biases, get better at self-awareness, and why it's so important. I mean, we're making 35,000 decisions a day, and hey, we need all the help we can get when it happens. So, Mickey, thank you. And for everybody out there, check out the Think Critically class we have and everything we have in our show notes today. And until next time, stay curious, keep learning, have a great day. What I think really stands out to me the most is making sure you're solving the right problem.
A lot of people think of problem solving as just about the solution, but problem solving is the entire process. How do we identify what the challenge is, or identify what the problem, the gap, whatever it is? There's creative problem solving, which is where we're trying to really pursue this really unique, different sort of solution than what we've ever done before. And I think that's really where a lot of people need to be these days.